Hello and welcome everyone to the Rational Standard podcast for this week. As always, here at every Friday, 12 o'clock, and as always, a bunch of disappointing events in the political, legal, and economic circumstances in South Africa. Uh, but yeah, I think today we're going to be focusing on two particular topics, and it's going to get a little bit more positive because today we're joined not just by Martin van Staden as always, but also by a foreign, and that is Joe Emilio. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Hello, guys. Thanks so much for having me. It's a great honor to be on the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks very much. And
Also, not a
yeah,
foreigner. Sorry. Come on. Don't make me be like News 24 and have to fact check you guys, okay? I have my South African passport and ID.
okay. It's okay because I think just about everybody on this podcast has been accused of being a foreigner. So clearly, words don't mean anything, Joe. It's not that we're targeting
No.
you in particular. Uh, yeah. So topics for today. It's going to be firstly, Martin. You wanted to discuss the recent judgment by the Constitutional Court, or well, their decision
I
not
think
to render
saying that
a judgment.
I think saying I want to discuss it is a bit of an overstatement. I wanna kind of jump off a very tall building when I hear about these things, but uh, just kind of to talk to our viewers about how absolutely atrocious this is. I think it's important. Yeah.
Well, yeah, maybe just color that in for everyone, and then we can get on to the other topics because I know Joe wanted to talk about why South Africa should be the 51st state of the US. So,
100%.
I'm coming
Yeah.
around to the
well,
idea, to be totally honest. Yeah.
I've heard worse. I've heard worse ideas. So,
Hey,
Yeah.
Phil Craig is going to go to Washington soon, so that we might be the 51st state pretty soon, sooner than
Uh,
you think. At least the
okay.
Western Cape.
oh,
Not a
there you
terrible
go.
idea given kind of the reality of this new judgment. So let me kind of try to the best of my ability to kind of sketch the context. So early 2010s, I think Julius Malema was ANC Youth League leader. By that time, the ANC itself had, since the kind of Mbeki years, tried to do some distance between it and the chant of "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer." Kind of that's in the past, and we're now dedicated to reconciliation and so forth. So the ANC itself is done with that. But here comes Firebrand Malema. He chants it as youth league leader, and then AfriForum at the time litigates against him. I think in the Equality Court or in the High Court. It's basically the same thing, and they reach a settlement. So the court says, try and settle this out of court, and they do. They get an agreement. Malema says, I solemnly swear that I'll never sing the song again, or I'll never chant this again. And cool, that settlement is turned into a court order. So it's law as far as the parties are concerned. Now, fast forward many years, EFF is formed. Julius Malema brings back Kyoto Boer and kind of unapologetically sings it. AfriForum, on the basis of the broken settlement, basically goes back to the Equality Court, this time with Advocate Mark Oppenheimer as counsel, and they kind of say, okay, you've now broken this agreement. You are engaging in hate speech, kind of basic hate speech as defined according to the South African Constitution and various pieces of legislation, specifically the 2000 Equality Act. And yeah, I'm not gonna. It was a very long case, many witnesses, and so on. What I'll focus on is Julius Malema goes and sits on the stand as a witness, called by AfriForum, or I think they were cross-examining him or whatever. But either way, he's in court in the witness box, and Advocate Mark Oppenheimer asks him many questions to try and build the picture of what is it, what is the context, what is your context, Mr. Malema, when you chant "Kill the Boer." And Malema is very honest. Like, you have to give him credit that he didn't try to kind of weasel his way through this. He's like, no, no. When I say Boer, I mean a white man, a white farmer, maybe specifically, but certainly a white individual. When we chant about violence, we mean violence. We will blow up the union buildings if the opportunity presented itself. We're not afraid of killing. A revolutionary is a killing machine. He looks at the judge. He says, "My lord, I don't want to create the impression that I am someone moderate. I am very militant. Militant is a word of violence." He says that. And then for me, the key moment which effectively solidifies the context, because everyone is always talking about context. Advocate Mark Oppenheimer says, on TV, Mr. Malema, you said that you are not calling for the slaughter of white people, at least for now. Cool. You said you added a proviso for now. Could you in the future, hypothetically, call for the slaughter of white people? Could you call for white genocide, Mr. Malema? And he says, well, I could. I don't think there's anything that necessarily prescribes me from doing that, but why would I do that? And Mark Oppenheimer asks him, well, you tell me, what could be the reason? And Malema doubles down. He says, I don't know right now, but there could be good reasons for me to call for white genocide in the future. And then just to kind of drive home the point, Mark Oppenheimer is like, okay, let's try and avoid doubt here. If I ask you to solemnly pledge now in open court that you will never ever call for the slaughter of white people, will you do that? First, he kind of says, I will do it. And then 20 seconds later, he says he will under no circumstances ever make such a pledge. He will not pledge that he will never kill white people. So context is sketched. This is the context of kill the Boer when he chants, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, brr, pa. And many other statements similar to that. That's what he means. This is what he means. So context sketched. The Equality Court judge shits the bed. He kind of gets it wrong completely. He ignores Malema's testimony. And obviously, that's not a case that should have been lost by AfriForum, but ultimately they appeal it to the Supreme Court of Appeal. This is where the Free Market Foundation's Rule of Law Project gets involved as an amicus. Our argument, effectively, we did say that, yes, this is hate speech, but the argument was that if you're going to have a rule, it needs to apply to everyone. You cannot put Penny Sparrow, which is a helpless, weak, powerless estate agent, or Vicky Momberg, I think was also an estate agent. You cannot put them in prison. You cannot put them in prison for saying something offensive under hate speech or criminal injuria and all these other things. And then when a powerful politician in front of crowds of hundreds of thousands chanting about killing, saying, oh, no, it's this is kind of protected speech. You cannot do that. That you cannot have these two rules coexisting in one legal system. That was our argument. That was our submission to the Supreme Court of Appeal. Judgment, Supreme Court of Appeal comes out. They ignore all of that. They don't even touch it. They say, no, Julius Malema is a politician. And that means that every reasonable person, there's a reasonable person test in our law. Every reasonable person who sees this guy standing on a stage shouting, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, brr, pa, will know that he is just being figurative. It's fine. It's political speech. You get it. He's a politician. Politicians say some rowdy things sometimes. So it's fine. It's cool.
Likewise, when he says he's being literal, that's also a figurative expression.
Yeah.
When he says, that's literally what I mean. That's what.
Yes.
That's just a figure of speech.
He's being emotive in a political moment. So there you go. The Supreme Court of Appeal ignores all of Julius Malema's testimony, where he basically said, "We mean what we say. We mean the chant as it is there. That's what we mean." The court ignored that. It made up its own thing, and so on. Of course, completely inconsistent with our law and established hate speech precedent. Of course, AfriForum appeals that judgment to the Constitutional Court to say the Supreme Court of Appeal erred. There is now a hell of a lot of uncertainty in our law about what the legal rule is. Please, Constitutional Court, one way or the other, you need to give us clarity now. And yesterday, so a Human Rights Day last week, Friday, 21 March, Julius Malema goes in front of it on a stage again. He screams, kill the Boer, kill the farmer. That leads to Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, everyone saying, what in God's name is going on in South Africa? This is completely beyond the pale. What the hell is this? And many millions of new people around the world being exposed to this. And suddenly, the Constitutional Court, this judgment that's been on their desk, or this case has been on their desk for probably around a year now, give or take. Suddenly now, they render judgment. And when I say render judgment, please do not misunderstand me. It was a one-page dismissal where they say, we see that AfriForum is appealing this case, but we're not going to hear it because we don't think they have any prospect of success. And they do that yesterday, 27 March 2025, the week that Kill the Boer is an international controversy. So, very long story, but ultimately it comes down to this. Our court has now made a political decision here. This is very clear to me. Otherwise, it would have made this judgment 4 months ago. It would have made it in 4 months, but it chose this week, this day, when this is an international topic, and it basically said, no, there's no problem here, no problem. And to me, that's clear that they are trying to insert themselves in a global discourse about whether bad things are happening in South Africa. And the court tried to add its few cents here in the most unjudicial, unjurisprudential way I think imaginable. And I think this really harms the credibility of the Constitutional Court and by implication the credibility of the Constitution itself. So I'm very frustrated by this.
I think a lot of people are frustrated. And also, I'm going to say it, all right? I'm going to say what I think a lot of people are going to say about this judgment is like, what if the shoe was on the other foot? What if a white man or a white politician, let's, apples with apples here, a white politician, John Steenhuisen, for example, and I'm just saying, for example, people, goes on stage in front of thousands of DA supporters or millions of DA supporters and says, kill a black man, kill a farmer, whatever, doesn't matter. Kill a black man, right? On the stage in front of millions of people. I mean, Martin, come on, you and Morné will know. Not even as the words leave his mouth will there be already the South African Human Rights Commission already taking him to court. The endless amount of news articles that would be created, damnation from the president, from every single political party you can possibly think of. The outcry would have been absolutely monstrous if a different politician other than Julius had done this.
I think that's sort of I mean, that's Joe, you talked about you're willing to say it, but I think that's sort of it went from being a kind of conspiracy theory sort of thing about 10 years ago to being explicit policy on the part of the courts. I mean, it's not the case that you're just accusing them of double standards with these things, and it's unclear as to whether or not they really do have double standards. They do, and they think it's good that they do. That's why they found in favor of Malema, is because they say no. I mean, Martin talked about context, but the context that they provide is no, we can't apply the law equally to different groups of people. Because that will render unequal outcomes. So, I mean, you can sort of hedge it however you want, but it's a fact, and it's a fact over which they're quite proud. So, and yeah, I agree with Martin as well that just considering all the talk about how all the solidarity movement and AfriForum and everybody else that's been going overseas, what they've done to the South African image overseas, image abroad. It's just, I mean, this is what's actually making us look bad, guys. If you want to know why people don't trust South Africa, why people are very worried about the terrible things that are happening in South Africa, it's because you have now a legislature, an executive, and a court system, all of whom approve of these sorts of things. And I think there is a debate about, which one of those two is actually the correct position. So, I mean, I think it's at least open to debate whether, with that case that you presented for John Steenhuisen, is that what we should have as a rule, or should the Malema version be the rule? But that there should be a rule is quite clear. And I think there is at least a strong argument for freedom of speech, even for politicians. But again, then it has to be applied equally. Whereas there's absolutely no prospect of that, and it's a actual policy position on the part of the courts that It's not that that's what we'd like to have, but we're not quite reaching it. It's that, no, that would be an atrocity if we actually got to a point where we were treating people from different groups in the exact same way. So, I mean, and that's really the point that I'd just like to make, is just that, that's why we look terrible in the rest of the world. And I agree that it is sort of weird that I think it's just under a year that this has been on the ConCourt's docket, that they would release it now. And it does also sort of put the lie to the fact that people, AfriForum and those people haven't been trying to find internal solutions. So, I mean, there's not much left anymore. If you've gone through the entire court system, you've written multiple letters, you've engaged on legislation, you've engaged on in other actions and all sorts of things. You've reached out internally as much as you can, and you've been rebuffed around every corner. I mean, then who can still say, no, wait, we must sort South African problems in South Africa? Well, it's clear that what you're just saying is that we're the wolves, you're the sheep, and if you like, you can ask us for some help, but don't go outside of the pen or something. You can always supplicate to yourself or supplicate to us, and we'll see if we're willing to sort of entertain any of your weird notions.
No, it's exactly that. I mean, this happened right before the judgment as well. So just shortly after, I think, the AfriForum and Solidarity delegation came back from Washington, Ramaphosa said that no, we shouldn't go like outside of South Africa, because just speak to the government, speak to parliament, go to the courts, and kind of we'll solve all of our issues internally. And then Kali Creo, CEO of AfriForum, said, okay, cool. He wrote a letter to Ramaphosa after Julius's utterances on Human Rights Day, and he didn't even ask for Ramaphosa to ban the song. He didn't ask for Ramaphosa to adopt new state policy to kind of combat hate speech. He literally just said, "You're the head of state. Kind of, you're supposed to be kind of this unifying figure according to the theory of kind of democracy. You're the head of state. Please condemn chants of brutal violence." That's all. Just say, that's bad. Say that. And Ramaphosa basically replied with a middle finger and said, "Go fuck yourself. I will not do that." And that's now again a great manifestation of, I think, what Dr. James Meiber called the two channels on which the ANC and the South African government operates, and that is that there is one channel for international consumption, and there is one for domestic consumption. The channel for international consumption, that is not aimed at AfriForum and Solidarity and people domestically with grievances. That's only for the benefit of foreign elites. This is Ramaphosa saying, we have a robust democracy, we have institutions, people can solve problems internally. This is the one channel. The other channel is, listen, and that's what Morné said, we are the wolves and the sheep must just kind of fall in line. It's exactly that. And the other thing that Morné said that's key here, I would have been happy with either option, with either outcome. Either South Africa adopts an essentially American approach to speech regulation, which is to say, listen, you can say whatever you want, however you want, whenever you want, with very tiny exceptions. And we, as the government and the courts, will not get involved. And that would be, if you're Julius Malema and you shout about killing people, that's fine. If you're John Steenhuisen and you shout about killing people, that's fine. If you're the Boeramag and you shout about overthrowing the state, that's fine. Go ahead, it's cool, fine. That's one outcome that I think would have been chaotic. I think in South Africa it might have been irresponsible, but I would have accepted it. I would have said, "Wow, okay, there's a challenge now, and we're up for the challenge. Let's create a spontaneous order out of this. Cool." It's one option. The other option is what I would have preferred, and that is that, listen, there's a rule against inciting violence, and there's a question, I think, about whether hate speech law is the right way to deal with this. I think the common law has always had the correct perspective, which is that violence is illegal and inciting and threatening violence is illegal. So you cannot do that. That's, to my mind, always been the common law position, and we've always carved out these exceptions to that. And I would have said the appropriate outcome here should have been closing the exceptions and saying that if you incite violence, you're going to prison, especially if you are a powerful person and you have a platform that could make that incitement real. Then especially you should go to prison. So I would have been happy with either outcome. And that was essentially the Rule of Law Project's argument, is to say, whatever the case, it needs to be applied equally. And as Morné said, the court has now rebuffed that. That comes after the Human Rights Commission has rebuffed that notion. Essentially, the idea that we cannot have equality of law. It is not something that is possible in South Africa. And that's a problem, because that creates very difficult questions that I don't want to ask, the conversations that I do not want to have, but which I think now we would be remiss if we were not having these conversations. The question is, if you are part of the disfavored community, which has now been told in no uncertain terms that you do not have equality of law, and in other contexts, this might be gay people, might be transgender people, it might be in America in like 200 years ago, it's black people. In South Africa today, it's white people. Like, it's just how it is. If you are part of the disfavored group, what duty of obedience do you owe the state now? I do not understand. I do not understand why, because the theory of democracy is this: if the state treats us equally, even if you're a minority, if the state treats us equally, you have a duty of obedience to the law because you are being treated equally. That is the theory of democracy. That is not how it works in South Africa. So now the question is, where does the duty of obedience come from? What is the thing I can latch onto and say, this is the reason why an act of parliament adopted by South Africa's government binds me? Why? I'm not sure that we can finally answer that question in light of a judgment of this nature anymore. Maybe there's a window for the court to fix it, but geez, I mean, it needs to hurry up.
I think you make some great points there, Martin, but like in a way you kind of answered it yourself, you know, like the fact that the Constitutional Court answered it for you, because to make this judgment tells you everything you need to know in a way. Not just that, but also like you got to wonder, you know, Julius Malema himself being, isn't he on the board of something with judges or something, like, you know,
Judicial Service Commission.
Yes, maybe that also has something to do with it. Maybe everybody who's been shouting at the top of their lungs saying the judicial system is captured, this just proves them right. And then to your point, you know, what now? How do we now know what is that barrier? What is the limit? What is and who? Right, and like you said, the people that are unfortunately not very liked in South Africa at the moment, the white people, they'll get the brunt of it, of everything. And I think, in a way, to Morné's point as well, that, you know, or sorry, I think it was actually Martin. You mentioned the whole channel thing. You know, this just puts more of a spotlight on that notion or that idea that Trump said about bad things are happening in South Africa. Here we are, guys. This is one of those bad things, you know. And to which people? Martin just answered it: white people. Simple.
Well, yeah, I think it's probably worthwhile just saying that disfavored means disfavored in elite circles. I don't think there is actually as big of an issue in reality as there is in sort of the media politics kind of sphere. I think they do certainly overplay it, but it is corrosive to our culture. It certainly is. It does bleed down through. I mean, you could just see in that initial, when Trump first had that, what was it, Truth Social about South Africa, it was sort of palpable. You could really feel that there was this almost heightened sense of sensitivity in South Africa regarding these issues. But for the most part, I don't think it really bleeds through to quote unquote real life. I don't think many people actually feel this way, which is, I mean, it's a sort of trite point, but it is what makes me optimistic. I think that, and I mean, not to sound too much like a Pollyanna, but it does give me some hope, because I think that it's almost a kind of, there's an issue with just our, I mean, the technical term is like our social imaginary. It's the governing kind of spirit in South Africa. It's the sort of the governing ideology or idea in the country. And I think once that's broken through, once we can break through that, I think that plenty of people are actually waiting on the other end of that to really go forward, because there is sort of this weird thing where the argument is that, look, the previous dispensation did X, Y, and Z, and that pushed up some people and that pulled down other people. We now have to do X, Y, and Z to find parity. But they don't call it X, Y, and Z. They call it, something else. And I think the minute that people realize, wait, it was wrong then, why is it right now? And I think that goes beyond merely considerations of equality or anything like that. At some point, people are going to have to realize that some things are just wrong, and they're wrong because they're inherently wrong, and they're wrong because they don't work, and they're wrong because they hurt both the people that they intended to hurt and the people that they intended to benefit. At the end of the day, it leaves everybody worse off. And I mean, I don't know why it's so difficult to actually convince people in South Africa that these preferential economic and political policies are bad. And they're always bad. They were bad and they are bad. And for some reason, people can't accept that they were harmful in the past and they're harmful now as well.
I kind of disagree with you, Morné.
Okay.
And the reason being is like, I agree with your notion of like, yeah, most people in South Africa are not violent towards each other, blah blah, blah, and not racist and all that stuff. Yeah, I agree with that to a certain extent. Reason being is because I think within the middle class of South Africa and maybe a bit the upper class, I think there's a lot of rational thinking people. I think a lot of people can see through the BS. I think a lot of people are tired of mainstream media, and most of them don't watch it, and they understand right and wrong and all that stuff. I think that there is a very big majority in South Africa that are poor and are very gullible and do listen to what the ANC says, do listen to what and okay, fine, EFF has a smaller support structure or support than ANC, and even MK now has taken over that. But the point is that there is a very a lot of people in South Africa that are in poverty, and they do listen to the politicians. They do listen to the rhetoric that is out there, and it is repeated. And that's my fear. The fear that once, and because Julius is going to use this, EFF is going to use this, and other people who might align with them will use this, and say like, it's not illegal, we can sing it, and then it kind of just becomes slowly but surely a cascading effect where it's almost normal now to sing this stuff, just like when that rapper Nota went on a podcast called White People Neanderthals. Then just in that week, you had the editor-in-chief of a mainstream media outlet also calling AfriForum and Solidarity Neanderthals for going to America. It's normalized. The dehumanization of a group of people, I think, is a very dangerous thing. So while I do agree that yes, we're not in a kind of war zone like civil war kind of vibe yet, I do think that because of judgments like this that have happened, it empowers the wrong people to say horrible things, and I fear that it becomes the norm, and then bad things start really happening.
Yeah, I guess my perspective would be somewhere between what you've both said, and that is that it's true that the majority do not have this, let's say, default opposition to other people based on their race. But on the other hand, the majority will always go along with whatever happens to be the kind of socially constructed political kind of narrative. So that's the majority is not an agent with agency in kind of in any society. It is usually kind of the term is the silent majority, and this is the case everywhere in the world. The majority doesn't do anything. It is always small elites that kind of drive change and drive the political narrative and drive political change. And whichever of the small elites, and they're all basically, I would almost argue that they're all equally small, but it's the one that is the loudest, the one that is the most kind of dedicated ultimately to their cause, and the one that can create the greatest volume of let's say messaging in the society will be what the majority will just just default to. They will just fall in with it. And that is both a good and a bad thing. It's a bad thing if you're a liberal or a libertarian or a conservative, because while I think people in our kind of side of society are high achieving, relatively wealthy, kind of hard workers, we do tend to lack something of a dedication to political causes in isolation. Whereas our opponents, kind of relatively depressed people, I mean, this is kind of, you observe this when you look at socialists and so on. People on the left, they tend to carry grievance with them. They tend to just be sad, mopey people, not terribly good at kind of real work, you might say. But what they make up for with that in spades is dedication to cause, like outright, clear dedication to whatever they've identified to be their cause. And that means that if it's time to go to the rally, if they're at work, it's like the tools go down. We're going to the rally. We are going to the rally now. Or if it's, you get a sick note from your doctor and you go to the rally or you go to the event or whatever, if you're on that side, you do it. On our side, it's like, I have obligations, I have to go to work and family and so on. And it's like, cool, that's you're a good person, but ultimately you're putting us at a disadvantage. And that's I would say that that's the case, not just in South Africa, but around the world. That's why I think libertarian parties, for instance, tend to do relatively poorly. It's not because our ideas suck or because the majority aren't open to kind of these kinds of ideas. It's just because when you need to grab the libertarian message, the guy is at work. He's not at the rally. He's not doing the things for the political cause. So I think you're both right. I think there's a lot of reason for positivity in what Morné said, because if it was the case that the majority out there had a bloodlust, that would have been like, the game is up. That'll be a disaster. So that's not the case. The majority is passive, always, everywhere, passive. But Joe's point, I think, is crucial, and that is that the majority is they're gonna be open to whatever the bad ideas are, for as long as the bad ideas are the dominant idea. And I think that's just a call to action to people like us and people kind of who broadly agree with us to start understanding that the political is important. I know we like to scoff at the political. We like to say that, no, I'm a hardworking, law-abiding person. I have real work to do. If you abdicate the political, someone else is going to grab it. So kind of you have to roll up your sleeves and get involved.
What's that saying, or that quote? One of you might know. One of our friends, I'm sure, have told us this. You may not care about politics, but politics cares about you, or something along those lines.
You may not be interested in politics, but politics is very much interested in you. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, I think sort of the main point I think I could make specifically related to the judgment, and it's a sort of a point in favor of Martin, both your point and Joe's point, is that we do have in South Africa a very kind of legalistic, positivistic kind of culture. So we do have if a court says A, then it has to be A. It can't be B or C or anything like that. And we had the COVID discussion last week, and that was just the best example ever of that. That was, once there's a law that says something, and especially if that law has been ratified by the court system, then it takes on a different form. It's like it's got the infallible stamp of approval from the Constitutional Court, which means that it's above reproach. It's sort of there's a weird thing in South Africa where I suppose we're not that unique. I think that's probably around the world. There's similar kind of tendency, although I think it's more pronounced here. But yeah, there's this weird thing where it's almost as though people think that reality changes, nature changes, its very structure as the court, makes a judgment. It's the entire universe is shaped by a court decision. If the Constitutional Court declared that grass is blue, then somehow the grass would actually be turning blue around us, or at least we'd have to convince ourselves that that's what happened, because the courts can't be wrong. So that's a point in favor. Martin, on the whole politics and motivation and all those sorts of things, I think it's I don't quite know if I agree with you. I think there is always this tendency where everybody across the spectrum thinks, oh geez, everybody on the other side, they all move in lockstep, and they're all so eager, and they all just fall in line, and they all just do whatever their leaders say. They never question anything. And the problem with our side is we just have all these different ideas, and it's just so vibrant, and it's just everybody's going in their own direction, and we always want to question everything before we get anything done. That's everybody. Everybody believes that. Everybody thinks that, the problem, the Democrats in the US say no, the Republicans, they just fall in line. Whatever dear leader Trump says, they just do whatever he says. And likewise, the Republicans, I mean, what's their big complaint about the Democrats is, they've got this media ecosystem bubble that once you step foot outside, even an inch off what whoever the governing structures of liberal thought is, then you get cancelled. So everybody sort of has that same idea of our side, despite it being right about everything. For some reason, can't agree, because we're just so intellectually stimulated, and we like to think, and we're so open to new ideas. But the other side, it's to our disadvantage, because the other side, they've got this very centralized, very concentrated decision-making system. I mean, that was the big critique in the Cold War, was the US can't compete with Russia because the US has all these different things moving in different directions. We're not coordinated. It's the entire economy is just decentralized. And the Soviet Union, they can just direct resources at will. It's the same thing that people are saying about China now. I think it's a natural human tendency. I think it's a natural tribal tendency. I don't think it's generally right. I think that the same thing that we'd say about libertarians or conservatives or anybody like that in this podcast is the same thing that is being said on the more liberal orientated podcasts, where they also agree that the problem is their people are out working or making art, or they're just trying to communicate these more abstract ideas. They're out studying, they're getting educations, they're getting doctorates, and they're filling high positions at universities, whereas the more conservative, more libertarian people, they don't even go to college. They just get a normal job, and that frees them up to get involved in politics. So I mean, you can make that argument on all sides. I don't think it's particularly true on either side. So I don't think there is an inherent disadvantage.
I guess I would say that I agree with you to the degree of it being a battle of ideas. I think that the Marxists are just as ideologically divided as you would find amongst liberals, and the fascists were just as ideologically divided amongst themselves as you would find amongst kind of socialists and so on. So I think that's true, and I think all kind of ideological groups have some high degree of dynamism. My submission is more the willingness to move beyond mere thought. So even if there is the dynamic disagreement, what I see in practice, so let's take fees must fall. by no means were all university students part of the Fees Must Fall protests. It was a minority. And yet, it was always the minority that was protesting. And if you stood around thinking we're going to do a counter protest, I mean, good luck. It didn't happen. The same happens with our political parties. I don't think the Democratic Alliance is terribly liberal anymore, but if you look at the smaller party, the EFF, and its rallies, it is usually far bigger than whatever the DA, which is an orders of magnitude bigger party with more supporters, can bring to its rallies. And I think that there is something to be said there, that the type of person that tends to be attracted to the different ideas, to a revolutionary socialist kind of call to a revolutionary socialist imperative, they tend to be more activistic, for lack of a better word, than people who tend to be attracted to our ideology, which is very much to its own, I would say, to its own kind of at its own expense, to the idea of taking responsibility, of being a responsible individual who, if something goes wrong, it's probably your fault. You need to find a solution to what has gone wrong. Very much an individualist kind of responsibility-focused ideology. And I've made the point often in the past, and that is that we take our individualism too far, whereas it's supposed to be an ideological, political kind of value proposition that we say governments must operate according to this idea. We've actually internalized it into the movement itself. So in 1776, the individualists would get together, they would pick up their muskets, and they would go and shoot the enemy. In 2025, I mean, good lord, good luck. Good luck trying to get a bunch of individualists, liberals, conservatives together to actually take action. It's an extremely difficult thing, which I don't think necessarily is as difficult on the other side of the aisle. And I again, that's not me saying that they are centralized or that they all agree kind of about what it is that needs to be done. I just think that the type of person who tends to get involved in that kind of politics is someone who is more willing to do things other than just nominally register their support for a specific idea. And it's not a majority amongst them. Let me make that clear. It's not all of them. It's not the majority of them, but it's a bigger plurality of them than it is of us. And I just think if you look in practice, this is always the case. Whenever you have libertarian versus left, it's always going to be bigger left, smaller libertarian when it comes to practical manifestations of numbers at an event, numbers at a rally, people willing to get their hands dirty and bloody. It's always going to be bigger on the left than on the sensible right. So that's kind of just my point. And I think there's good reasons for why that is, but I think it must be acknowledged as a weakness on our side. It makes us very sensible. It makes us very productive, but I think that's one of the reasons we tend to lose. And that is not because of something outside of our power. It's something that's very much within our domain of control. And all that needs to happen is we just need to be like, I'm going to get off my high horse. I'm going to take off my shining armor, and I'm going to actually start kind of getting my hands dirty. Actually tell my boss, listen, I'm going to a rally now. That's what's going to happen. Because if they can do it, I can do it. If they don't get fired, I won't get fired. That has to be the mental calculation. Otherwise, you'll be at a disadvantage, I would say.
The problem is we live in a communist. People will disagree with me, but we live in a communist state to a certain degree. And I know from a friend of mine. He told me a story, interesting story. So you remember when there was that Zuma must fall? Like there was like protests in Joburg on the streets. Hundreds of people went out. Signs, Zuma must fall, all that stuff. So he didn't go. Even though the boss said, listen, if you guys want to go, you can go. Okay? He didn't go. And he was there when his boss went into the office to see who was at that rally or at that protest. And the next day, they were all given resignation letter. Not resignation, what do we call it? You're fired, basically. To let them go. So I think
the people
that's
who
also,
did go.
Yeah, the people who
The
did
people
go.
who Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay.
He
Yeah,
gave permission
people
for them
did
to
go.
go, and then he fired those who
And then
went.
they fired him. I'm not gonna mention any names. I'm gonna say what company, but I think there is that. I think one of the reasons, and it's to your point, Martin, one of the reasons why people aren't as active is the same reason why you don't have a lot of people like me and you and us on YouTube saying these things. It's because people are scared. People are scared to lose their job. You know, they don't know what their boss, where they align politically. A lot of people are scared. I mean, like within our close circles, maybe we talk amongst each other with our close friends who we can trust and say what we really feel. But outside of that, even like with your coworkers and other job aspects, like I mean, you guys are safe. You all think you all have you all know everybody at the Free Market Foundation or wherever it is, Rational Standard, wherever you are, we're like-minded thinking people. But someone who works at a Checkers or someone who is at a desk in front of a computer the whole day, they don't know what their boss is thinking politically or what their next, or what they, you know, they might be gunning for that same promotion. They could say something that can really affect their opportunity. And I think that is the fear that people live in, is one of the reasons why that person might want to go to the rally. That person might want to go and protest with the DA and stuff like that, but they're just scared. They're scared. And even if they don't lose their job, they're scared of being ridiculed by other people. They're scared of cancel culture. They're scared of a whole lot of things. And that is very, very, very real in South Africa, because I've just through my YouTube channel, experienced a lot of people in my, just sending me emails or in my DMs saying, you know, thank you for saying what you're saying, because, you know, they're scared to say it. I don't think that's like a complete reason as to why people don't join rallies, but I think it's definitely part of the reason why it's difficult to get people to mobilize.
Yeah, no, I agree completely with that. I think that the minute you expect anybody to actually threaten their job prospects or threaten their financial, or even, you know, significantly threaten their social well-being, you're asking too much. The minute you expect that from them, that's too high a cost for anybody to bear. The reason why other people can do it is because it doesn't come at that cost. So you have to actually the thing you have to do is not to convince people to bear the cost. You have to actually lower the cost of taking part. And I think, you know, I mean, firstly, I don't think necessarily attending a rally means anything. I think that you know, at any given EFF rally, I wonder what percentage of the people actually vote EFF, or, you know, just happen to have been unemployed for more than a year. So if you tell them, hey, here's a nice party and, you know, we might get some free stuff, then you just show up. So I think that is a large percentage. I think, you know, attendance of a rally doesn't necessarily mean you support the cause of the rally. That's the one thing. And the other thing is just, you know, either those people aren't worried about bearing the cost because they don't have any job to lose, and you know, it isn't a massive social cost to take part in those sorts of things. That's the second option, is that it's just not much of a cost. But I think that's what has to happen, and I think that's why, Joe, those kinds of shows and this kind of show is important, because we are in the fortunate position that it doesn't really come at a financial cost, or it hasn't yet. But let's see how things go. But it hasn't really. We are in a position, and that's why it's important to have these sort of institutions to say things which other people, I don't expect them to say it. I don't expect anybody to do these things in their normal lives. I don't expect any normal person to be willing to, you know, give up their livelihoods just to make a political point. That's why we have to actually lower the bar for them. We have to make it easier so that they can say it without having to bear significant cost to their livelihoods. So that's what has to happen. You're not going to convince normal people to give up their careers and to live in penury just because you'd like them to make some sort of political statement, or you'd like them to get more politically active. You have to make sure that it's not a threat. You have to make sure that the transaction costs are low enough that people can just naturally do it. That's what I think happened in the most recent US election is, whereas in the past, saying that you're voting Republican or voting Donald Trump, that was an enormous social and even an economic cost. Whereas
it made people in South Africa crazy, man. Like, that's how crazy it was. Like, just for me as an American to say like, oh, I support Trump or I like Trump. Didn't even, for the record, didn't even vote for the guy. Okay, but just that I supported him was enough to get me canceled in South Africa as an American who has a right to say I have an opinion. That's how crazy it was.
Yeah. No, so look, I agree with both of you. That it's correct. There is a high cost. What I don't think maybe that you're factoring in is that the current moment is not. We didn't fall into March of 2025 without going through time. We came to this point in time where it is a high social cost because our predecessors dropped the ball in exactly the way that I said. The social context in which we exist, where this thing does have this high cost, was a social context that was created. It is not written in stones that come from Mount Sinai that say if you are a liberal or a conservative and you express those opinions, you will lose your job, you'll lose your family and friends. This is something that is cultivated, and this is something that is created through activism, through activity. Not, I mean, activism has a very specific connotation. Let me just use the word activity. It's because that the idea that if you're white and you say something sensible, you're a racist, that is something that was cultivated in our discourse. That is something that was cultivated in our media, in our politics. And it could only have been cultivated in our media, in our politics, because that was the dominant kind of view of the people engaging. So the journalist students coming out of our universities, they were taught this because their teachers from the humanities were immersed in kind of critical theory, Frankfurt School type thinking, and the adjacents. And my question is not that, okay, in this moment, yes, you must now give up potentially your job to go and be active. My question is, it wasn't always like this. Where were the professors of journalistic studies who were supposed to be the bulwark against that? Where were the conservatives, the libertarians, the liberals at that stage when the cost was low? And by as recently as the 1990s, the cost was far, far, far lower than it currently is. There was a far more open conversation in this country. No, there certainly was. You could have said a lot more kind of things freely. That, I mean, the Avia beer, for instance, they drove a tank into the Kempton Park kind of negotiation center. None of those people went to prison ultimately. So you could have done and said things at a far more kind of socially challenging way than you can get away with today. And that is a result of, to a large degree, the Western kind of woke kind of social context that was created for us. And the question is not, well, are you now willing to give up your whole life to make a political point? The question is, well, the reality is, if you're not, the cost is going to only get higher. It's only going to get higher. It's not going to get less. If you are inactive and you rely on an increasingly smaller number of people to create the environment for you to say things, you're kind of in trouble. You have to kind of actually do something and then engage in some activity so that we can get the numbers up. That's the one reality. The other reality is the reality is not arbitrary. It was made, it was cultivated, and we have to ask questions. We have to ask serious questions about why liberals, libertarians, conservatives, even center left sensible people have in the not too distant past been so reluctant, so disengaged compared to the other side. And I understand, Morné, the sentiment that you both use the idea just to make a political point, just to make a political point. That is exactly the kind of issue that I'm getting at. To the left, it is not just a political point. Like, to the left, it's like, here's the political point, and here's family. Here's our work. Here is morality. Here's decency. The political point is up here. It's not just a political point to them. The political point to them is the transcendent moral imperative That is to them the be all and the end all. That is why, take Islam for example, which I throw immediately into the left. They drive cars into big crowds of people. It's like they're obviously that guy is losing his job. He's a terrorist. His family is not going to come see him at the prison, but he's willing to do that. And there's lots of people in Islam who are willing to do that. The left, the general socialistic left, is not far behind on that. Usually you'll find that the left is far more willing to engage in kind of, my goodness, look at South Africa's anti-apartheid movement. They spent just a little bit of time attacking military targets, and then they just went and blew up civilians. It's like they are willing to do that. They are willing to get their hands dirty. It's despicable. It's sick. But I'm using that to make the point that whatever exists on our side of the divide doesn't even get close to that. It's not even the willingness to get your hands a little bit dirty, to insult your enemy. The MAGA movement, I think, is potentially an exception that I don't fully endorse. But suddenly conservatives are willing to actually insult their opponents. It's not just about decency anymore. It's not just about open discourse. There is a large degree of ridicule now, of real kind of activity from the American, I don't know if you can call it reactionaries, let's say. It's starting to happen there, but still in South Africa, it's not there. And around the world, to a large degree, I think there's an absence of that willingness to do things again. And I think you both made the point, because it's only political. It's this kind of tertiary consideration to family, to work, and that sounds very obvious to us, as it should. I think it's a good kind of good, decent perspective to have. But we must be aware that our enemies do not see it that way. It's not.
But what if I told you? What if I told you it's kind of already happening, Martin? What if I told you that if we just take one example, let's take the ANC, okay? Before lockdown, especially before lockdown, 2016, 2014, you really weren't allowed, quote unquote, to criticize the ANC. If anybody criticized the ANC, you were labeled immediately as racist, as this horrible person. How dare you criticize the ANC, the saviors of South Africa, right? That was quite a lefty opinion. That was, mainstream media would come down on you hard if you dare say anything wrong about how the ANC is running the country. But look what happened after lockdown. During lockdown, it was still there. It was still like, you're not allowed to criticize. But after lockdown, in recent years, more and more and more people, what happened was social cohesion, is that more and more people were starting to criticize the ANC. And I mean, across the whole race of people in South Africa, everybody, it came to a point where even, I remember this, shortly after lockdown, the mainstream media, a little bit today still do it, but really tried hard to defend the ANC even after lockdown. And it came to a point where it was like laughable. Like everybody was just now pointing it out, even to the mainstream media, until eventually the mainstream media buckled and started. Now there's just news about this corruption, that corruption, blah, 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 blah. And then they started to criticize the ANC. And then all of a sudden, it was cool to criticize the ANC. And until today, yes, there are a few outlets that might frown on it. But for the most part, nobody cringes anymore if you criticize the ANC. And I think, in a way, that is that kind of silent majority growing, that kind of, that I would, what I'm getting at is like people like us that talk about it, that talk about things, that, because there were people even in 1994 that were saying this is the worst idea ever. ANC shouldn't be in power. They're going to do this, or they're going to do that. And they were ridiculed. They were told they're racist, blah, blah, but look what's happened. And just like guys like Jonathan, what's his name? Is Jonathan Witt on Twitter, who was very vehemently against the lockdowns. And he's a doctor, and he 100% from the beginning said this is a terrible idea, and he was called crazy and all that stuff, but turned out to be right. There's always someone that is going to be against the grain, so to speak. But it takes that person and other people to talk, to say these things, to come out here and be like, listen, guys, this is flipping happening. And then you start to see a change, that change that maybe you're yearning for. Where are the people that didn't say this or didn't say that, blah, blah. We're the people. We're the people now that are saying, listen, alert, hello, we need to look at this. You need to pay attention here. But there, like I said before, there is a lot of, unfortunately, people that don't care until it hurts them, and that's just the reality. I don't know if I hope I'm making sense in what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, you're making perfect sense. I think that I think that it's you've really hit the nail on the head there, because I think the thing is, when something isn't allowable, people don't say it. When it's not allowed, when it's outside of the Overton window, people don't engage in that sort of discussion. I think, that's why you have to either put things into that window, or you have to expand the window, or if you have to shift the window, or whatever. But the point is that, and Joe, I think you're quite right when it comes to criticism of the ANC. I think it probably started with the really bad performance under Jacob Zuma and the obvious corruption under Jacob Zuma. That sort of made it a part of allowable discourse to insult people in the ANC. Later, it became even more commonplace to insult the ANC. Now it's almost obligatory. Very few people still believe in the ANC as an institution. So I mean, that's shifted the window. And on something like BEE, for example, it was unthinkable 10 years ago that you could have various international institutions saying that BEE has to stop. You get opinion columns in the mainstream media from mainstream journalists saying maybe we should do away with BEE. That was so entirely, it was never going to happen if you asked someone 10 years ago. Whereas now, at least we're having the discussion. And I think that, Martin, I mean, you live your own values. You say, we're the people of individual responsibility. We're the people of do-it-yourself. We're the people of, you have to find solutions to your own problems. But your problem statement is a bunch of people in the past put us in the situation that we are in now, and now all you guys have to find a solution for it. And unless you guys all, well, no, you sort of got this very
we hear everyone
collectivist
watching now. Everyone watching
notion.
now. We have to solve a problem. We have to solve the problem. Yeah.
No, but my point's just, if you don't have these activist kind of organizations, if you don't have these institutions that can put people in a position where, can put people capable of criticizing the dominant ideology and willing to do it, and you don't put them in a position where, we are this and this activist group, so you're not going to lose your job if you say these and these bad things, then unless you do that, then nobody's going to do that. You need to have people in positions who can take those, you can argue for those ideas without having to bear the economic costs of it. Social costs, I mean, you're always going to have that. You're always going to have pushback, but that's also short-lived. I mean, eventually the tide does turn, and then you go from being, the zero to being the hero. And but my point is just, I don't think you can ask that of just your ordinary viewer. I think what you can ask of your ordinary viewer is, if you're aware of these organizations, and there are plenty of them, try to fund them. Or if you do want to make a difference, try to, without funding them, try to establish your own, or,
No, but that's activity. That's activity. You have to, that's activity. So I would say, yes, that qualifies. My concern is that the activity in general is just relatively absent, but that would qualify as activity. Funding is a big activity.
Yeah. My point is, it doesn't have to be, getting on the streets, throwing Molotov cocktails at Teslas. In fact, I think that's
Eventually it
often
has
more
to.
harmful. It's often more harmful, though. I
Careful,
think.
Martin. You might be advocating for violence there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's legal now, isn't it? Or did I miss something?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think yeah.
Or
Sorry,
does it
that's
have to be
basic.
for racial slaughter? Yeah.
Well, I think Teslas it's almost illegal to import them at this point.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, is it?
So good luck finding one in South Africa. Sorry, Joe, you were saying.
I think we are seeing the change to a certain degree. And I think there is pushback from the left, and there always will be, just like there'll always be pushback from the right. But I think in South Africa specifically, the biggest challenge is, one, getting the message out there, which is why it's so good to have organizations like Free Market Foundation, ConCourt, AfriForum, and all the above, as well as platforms like this and platforms like mine, and so on and so forth. And there's greater platforms than mine even, existing in the sphere, in the political sphere, because people do share, people do talk, and the message does get out there, even though it's very slow. I think the bigger challenge than that is reaching the ANC would call them previously disadvantaged, but the poor, because I think the poor are very misled. I think they are lied to a lot. I think a lot of them still cling to the ANC narrative that has been fed to them. But as well as, when you're poor, the only thing you really care about is like, where's my next meal coming from and how am I going to get there? How am I going to feed the baby that I have? How am I going to feed the family that I have? How am I going to get to work tomorrow? Even that sometimes is an issue. And I think the ANC is done very well to construct a civilization where the poor have no choice but to be either dependent on them or really just claw their way through life just to survive. And to get our libertarian message to them, to help them understand and see who the real bad people are, that I think is the biggest challenge. And I think the moment that people do that, like if there's a political party that somehow grows out of that or whatever, just to open the eyes of the poor people in South Africa, and tell them, like, listen, guys, you've been supporting this party, but they've been the one that's actually been screwing you guys hard for the past few years. And these are the values that maybe you want to start looking at, non-racial values and all that stuff. It's not actually someone to actually say, it's not actually the white people, guys. Wow. I think that's the biggest challenge for South Africa. I'm not saying that there needs to be a white person in power. I'm not saying that at all. I don't care what race comes up and says this to the mass people, but just someone with the ideology of like, okay, genuinely people first, genuinely free market, genuinely wants to better South Africa and make it prosperous, and let go of all the political or what's it called, the identity politics and all that stuff. I think that's when real change will happen. But I don't think it can happen without having these conversations and without sharing this live stream and liking this video and subscribing to this channel and various other, like Morné was saying, supporting Free Market Foundation, all the other organizations and stuff like that. I mean, that's also definitely very important. But the reality is not everybody has the means to support financially. So like you said, like it, share it, talk about it with your friends, whatever. That is enough. And I do think, which is why I made that ANC example earlier, I personally do feel that there is a slight change. It's very slow. There's no doubt about that. It's very slow. And things like the judgment, I think, do put a hinder on it in a way. Maybe some people lose hope because they start thinking, oh, our justice system is messed up. What's the point? That does put a damper on things. But for the most part, I do believe that there is a slight change, at least in the middle class tier of society in South Africa. There is a change happening. The challenge is getting to the poor people, because that's where the real change will happen, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that the other challenge is it's almost sort of two different kind of messages that you have to sell. On the one hand, the one that I think is working, and that's the one you sort of put your finger on, Joe, is that we are seeing people, becoming more disillusioned with the ANC and becoming more disillusioned with their approach to governance. So if people are starting to buy into the notion that clearly what we have been doing isn't working, and they're starting to actually feel the consequences of it not working, it's starting to become far more tangible that these things are affecting us, that sometimes the lights don't go on, sometimes you open the tap and you don't have water. And I mean, you see it not just from your own personal experience, but you see it when you drive through the streets and those sorts of things. But yeah, that's one message, and that's been a successful message, that they've done a bad job and we should be doing it either differently or with different people. I think that's we are gaining traction there, but I think you're right on the poor people. I mean, the first challenge is just reaching them, and the second challenge is, it's a sort of, they don't really have much to lose. They're likely risk averse when it comes to the little bit that they do have. They're likely thinking about it as, it's the devil that I know as opposed to the devil that I don't. So you need, on the one hand, a really staunch criticism, but on the other hand, you also need a kind of hopeful message. You kind of need something that's a positive thing that you're putting on the agenda. It's not just anti a particular thing, but it has to actually be pro, and it has to actually be sort of something a little bit more substantive than just growth and jobs, because that sounds like people think that's an agenda. I mean, those are outcomes, if anything. If it's anything, I think for the most part it might just be an empty platitude. But I mean, growth and jobs is not an agenda. You need to actually have something a little bit more positive than that, and something to just get poor people to a point where you can shift their own consciousness almost from I don't want a handout. I'm willing to accept a hand up, but I don't want to live as a dependent of the state. I want to actually be in a position where I can care for myself and I can care for my loved ones. And I mean,
teach a man
exactly.
to fish.
Yeah, and people are eager to learn. At least that's my impression, is that people do want to actually learn. They just they're either too pessimistic about the prospects, or they're too, I suppose, comfortable with the current situation. Although I don't think that's a very substantial number of people.
No, South Africans want to work. That's the kind of the thing that I think people should be quite positive about. South Africans are hardworking. They want to work. I think the desire for social grants and so on is simply because, well, there are no jobs, and that's a policy consequence. So it's not that poor South Africans are these rent seekers who just want to kind of fall back on the couch and be like, send me the grants. I think if given the tangible option to get a good job and getting a good grant, they'll pick the job. I think there's a lot of dignity that people just necessarily find in working. So I think in that respect, we have an advantage. So in that, I actually don't think it's as difficult as us having to convince the poor. I think the poor are convinced. I think the IRR's research over many years polling shows this, that lower income South Africans across the board are very kind of keen to have pro-growth policy, pro-jobs policy, not racial policy, and so on. And that's kind of the point that I've been making, is that it's not about convincing the silent majority. I don't think you have to convince the silent majority. I think you have to either convince or neutralize the people who kind of control certain aspects of social consciousness. The media. That's why I think alternative media is a wonderful thing. You just have to replace that with a more sensible media. The media is the big one. Then there's also courts and so on. Morné's point from earlier is very important in South Africa, and that is this idea that once a judge has said something, then suddenly reality has bent to accommodate the judgment, which is absurd. But that shows the massive social influence that courts have. That's why it's important to also either convince judges or neutralize bad judges and then get better judges. Politics to some degree, but just I think my point is it's not as difficult as having to convince 50% plus one of your society of the sensibility of your ideas. It's a far more manageable task, which is you have to find the pathways of communication with the masses, which is often popular culture, which is a space we do not operate in. We don't have the kind of expertise for that to operate there, but you have to capture some part of that pathway and then it will flow down. This is something I think the left has been good at. I think it's something that American conservatives are getting increasingly better at. You can think of a company like Daily Wire in the US making movies. And all of these movies have at least a very subtle conservative message in them. So it's not that Daily Wire is going kind of into ghettos and into trailer parks in the US and saying, hey, you have to be a conservative. No, they make a good movie, they make a good story, and those people watch it and they're like, cool. So that's kind of, I think, a more manageable task. And then again, in South Africa, I think the fact that we don't generally have a lazy rent-seeking population is a point that counts in our favor. It's something that makes our job much easier.
Yeah, except for those people in Parliament. That's our lazy rent-seeking population.
They're the rent seekers,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you go, yeah?
Is there I was wondering if we want to say something about the other big event this week, which I guess is now a slightly smaller event.
Well, I suppose you're talking about the nomination, at least, of was it Leo Brent Bozell III as U.S. ambassador to South Africa. There was a lot of talk initially that it was going to be Joel Pollock. It was never really official. It was, but there was a lot of speculation that it was going to be him. But in the wake of having our own ambassador be ejected from the US has now elected Mr. Bozell. And just a little background on Mr. Bozell. He is known as a conservative activist. His sort of main thing that he did in the US, prior to his nomination, was he ran sort of the conservative, I suppose you call right-wing competitor of Media Matters. So sort of they're called the Media Research Center. So they looked at mainstream media, and if you've ever seen one of those graphics that says, okay, CNN had this many minutes of coverage for Trump and it was 92% negative, and it had this many minutes of coverage for Kamala Harris and it was this 80% positive or something. That's typically the kind of graphics or the kind of research that Brent Bozell's outfit ran. And that's who he is. We still don't have a new nominee for the US ambassador or the South African ambassador in the US. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, what's the impression from your guys' end? And just to inform everyone, the way this works is we also have to accept the nomination. Whoever the US nominates, we have to accept that nomination. Ordinarily, that's never really a controversial thing. Ordinarily, the whichever country can nominate whomever they wish, and the host country are more than willing to accept whoever that may be. That's why positions as ambassadors are normally also kind of giveaways to reward people for political favors. There's also kind of rent seeking. But yeah, so we still have to accede to the nomination from our side. Joe, you have a stake on both sides here, so maybe give us your impression.
Well, it's not good. I mean, I don't know a lot about the ambassador that Trump put as the ambassador, but from what I've seen, what you eloquently surmised quite well, he's conservative. He's apparently he's a Zionist, which is a problem for a lot of people. And one thing that I think I saw Chris Wyatt mention is that he wasn't surprised, and Chris Wyatt is someone on our side who very often comments on South African affairs, and he said that it wasn't a surprise for him, that it was a good match and a good fit. And when I saw him comment that, I thought, okay, well then, yeah, I guess for those who know, it's obviously not a surprise. Having said that, though, it's going to be very interesting to see if South Africa accepts the ambassador. It's going to be very interesting to see if South Africa doesn't, because, man, it's just been hit after hit after hit with South Africa, man. Like I really want South Africa to just, or ANC or Cyril to just shut up, just accept this has happened, and be okay, and be graceful, and be nice, and just play along, dude. Just for once. I have a feeling they're going to double down. I have a feeling they're going to say, nope, we don't accept. And then it's an even bigger smack in Trump's face. And then, boom, sanctions of some kind. I don't know what possible sanctions are. But I feel like sanctions are literally just like peeping around the corner there, waiting to come over to South Africa.
I really hope not.
I really hope not too. I'm not advocating for it. But
I think it would be so anticlimactic if the American government at its kind of highest moment chooses to punish ordinary South Africans rather than targeting the politicians. I mean, that would be
I do
like
think
you would be like, yeah, and then it's like
no, but I do think that the reason why we haven't had sanctions yet is because of that. Is because I think some administrations or politicians and administrators in the Trump circle are telling Trump, like, listen, this is going to hurt people if we do this. And I do think that the U.S. is giving some grace to South Africa, but it's almost like it's like they're sitting there going like, okay, we want this, and South Africa is like, no, and it's like, okay, what if we did this? So South Africa's like a toddler, like, no, and it's like eventually the parent is gonna get upset. There's gonna be a slap. There's gonna be something that's gonna hurt.
But the one saying no is the government. So I mean, just sanction the politicians. I know that sometimes that has second order consequences and so on, but
it's
like
obviously
I think
weird
it would
if your toddler is misbehaving and then you punish the cat, right? Like
exactly. Yeah, that's the worry. That's the worry. Yeah.
I get that,
but I mean, there you can go, Joe. Sorry.
No, like I was just going to end off by saying, like, I understand where Martin's coming from, but unfortunately, I think at some point, maybe America thinks, or I don't know what they're thinking, but maybe they think like, hey, let's put these sanctions on, and then maybe the ANC will listen because people will be so upset and public pressure and all that stuff. But I don't know. I
we'll
really
need to
don't know.
disabuse him of that notion. It's not how our politics
well, I
works.
think the problem is, Martin, that all the politicians also have private interests, and they have family members and friends and all those sorts of things, and other contacts that are in sort of codependent patronage kind of relationships. So even if you do sanction politicians, if they have a brother or a cousin or a nephew or whatever that's on the board of 20 different JSE listed companies, then then you don't really feel the pain. And then if you want to extend that to, and that's what they had to do in Russia. It's not just the politicians, it's also the quote unquote oligarchs, the people who are dependent upon the state for their money. But so eventually you get to a point where, okay, you're just sanctioning so many people and so many companies that you're effectively sanctioning the country. if you do want to actually have an impact. And then there's always the risk that it can backfire, of course, as well. But yeah, I think, Joe, yeah, my main fear is that based on past performance, the South African, you should just ask yourself what's the dumbest thing they could possibly do in any given situation, and then they'll find an even dumber thing to do, and then you'll be surprised by saying, "Oh, wow, I wouldn't even have thought of that. It's even stupider than I thought."
Have they renamed the road yet?
No,
Has there been any
they've
update with
suspended
that?
that process. Apparently, they've suspended that process.
Okay. Well, they might rename it now.
No, but I mean that's the point. The Americans, I mean, they've made some questionable foreign policy decisions over a few decades, but I think they need to be smart enough to know that you're not going to get the desired effect by punishing the whole economy. And you're right, Morné. It's if you do punish, given how Transformania is entrenched in the ANC ecosystem throughout the economy, there are going to be general economic consequences to targeted sanctions. But I think that's fine. I just think the Americans have to keep their hands clean, and they are currently clean. The Americans have taken the moral high ground. They're right. They're correct on the Israel matter. They're correct on the race law, on confiscation, and so on. And their reaction has been rational and understandable. And it has been a pro-South African reaction. They've taken the side of sense for South Africa. It's like they're not saying get rid of the race laws because we feel bad about it. It's like race law is a bad thing. It's bad for you and it's bad for everyone. So the America's hands are clean in this situation. But I think that they would dirty their hands if they said we are imposing generalized sanctions on the South African economy. American companies aren't allowed to do business with South African companies anymore. I think if they qualify it enough, again, it will be harmful. But if they qualify it enough to say, listen, you can do business with companies that aren't in the state ecosystem, then I think that's fair enough. I think even though it might be difficult to escape that in practice, that is at least still a window, and it at least allows the Americans to say, listen, we are doing everything in our power to make this a regime that is aimed at bringing about sensible policy change rather than just something to hit ordinary South Africans with. And yeah, I think the tools are available to them to do that. I think it would be. I think ANC cadres will feel it if they can't fly to New York anymore to attend UN meetings, if they have to attend UN General Assembly meetings via Zoom now. I think that would matter. That would matter to them.
What would it take? Like, can they do this? Can they say, okay, like, I don't know what the correct wording is, but like if they wanted to sanction something, let's say they said, okay, McDonald's, KFC, Pizza Hut, or whatever, all the fast food franchises no longer allowed to operate in South Africa. I don't know what the correct wording would be, but could they do that?
They can do that, and they did do that against the apartheid regime for certain sectors. So it is possible.
That's a generalized sanctions. That's a bad thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a bad thing because people lose jobs, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we lose KFC and McDonald's and Burger King and all those
things. Well, losing
things,
KFC may not be a bad thing, Morné, if you really think about it. No. That is really going to anger the people.
I know the ANC. No, but I mean that would be an example of generalized sanctions, and I think that's a bad thing.
Obviously, I don't want anybody to lose their job. I don't think anybody wants them to lose their job.
I also just
in a country.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is you have to also be realistic. I understand you want something that's super effective and has absolutely no negative side effects, but I think you have to really be honest about whether or not that's really going to be possible. And
there will be negative side effects, but it shouldn't be targeted at the innocent. It shouldn't be targeted. The innocent will feel it, of course.
It should be a side effect, not a main effect.
Yes,
because also in a country where nearly 50% unemployment, you don't want to. You now really want to create more unemployment, but I think also the right people need to blame, because you know what's going to happen. Even if, let's say, for example, whatever restaurants and retail outlets were sanctioned, all of a sudden a lot of people lost a lot of jobs. You know for a fact, News 24 and all these other outlets are gonna still blame AfriForum for it. Like that's somehow they'll make the connection. Like, see, you all are unemployment now is at 60% because of AfriForum. That's probably
what's that? Is it the Always Sunny in Philadelphia meme of the guy with all the red lint that he sort of ties to one another? But yeah, on that point, nobody's taken the bait yet. He made a career for himself exposing leftist bias in the US media. What's he going to do in South Africa, where we have such a wonderful media ecosystem?
As we say in Afrikaans, hy gaan homself moet terughou. The problem is, as the ambassador, if he doesn't want to be declared persona non grata, he's going to have to grit his teeth, and because he's not flying into a balanced media environment. That's for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, he's unlikely to be declared persona non grata for criticizing the media. It's not like he's criticizing the state. Who would actually criticize the leader? What sort of diplomat would do that? Just insult the leader of a foreign nation?
Yeah, no, I mean, come on, don't be ridiculous.
You'd have to be an idiot.
Yeah, no, geez. No, I think we spoke about this briefly before the show, is that I think that our government is in the mood for some spite, probably. And I wouldn't be surprised if they don't deny him like at the initial stage, like they'll wait for him to do something like threaten freedom of the press in South Africa by criticizing South Africa's press or whatever, and then the hero ANC swoops in and says, we take free press very seriously in this country, you're a persona non grata, go home. It will just be spite. It will be obviously stupid, but the ANC will feel very good about doing something like that.
I agree with Martin on that one.
So he will have to. I mean, I don't want him to self-censor too much, but yeah, he's gonna have to be careful if he wants this to be a long-term post. Rob Dugan was hypothesizing or speculating that maybe this is a flex by Trump, by the administration, to kind of throw this more radical Zionist into the ring, and then the ANC is like, under no circumstances is this acceptable to us, and then Trump can be like, okay, then it's Joe Pollock. So that's kind of some speculation around it, but yeah, I don't think the ANC is going to be terribly happy with whatever Trump sends, and then given how, Morné, you're talking about kind of ordinarily, and these are not ordinary times, I think we're in for quite a spectacle, actually.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. I think you said it, Martin. It's spiteful and obviously stupid. That's the name of the game. Increasingly so, unfortunately. But yeah, we have had a very good discussion, and thanks everyone for viewing. Please also subscribe to this channel, share it, talk to people about it, put it on your tablet and run through the streets to have everybody view it. And to Joe, his channel as well. Joe, please tell everybody about your channel, and please make sure if you enjoyed this, or if you think it can be done better, then it's probably being done better on Joe's show. So please go there as well.
No, it's a fantastic show. Don't sell yourself short. It's a great show. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, you can find me on Newsflash with Joe Emilio. Just Google that or search it on YouTube. I do basically daily videos almost every day about the current happenings in South Africa, commentate and bring a bit of comedy to the news as well. Thank you guys, by the way, Morné and Martin, for having me. It's been a lovely conversation. I really enjoyed it. So I hope you guys will have me back soon. And yeah, everybody else, enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Joe. It's been a pleasure to have you. And thank you, as always, to the viewers. Have a great weekend.